Welcome to Behind the Book. It's time now for Behind the Book. Hosted by Tess, Thompson, and Karen McQuestion. Two authors with a passion for books, no filters, and limitless curiosity. Join them now to find out the real story behind your favorite books and authors. And now, Behind the Book.
Hello, everybody. It's the day I've been waiting for, Tess Day. It's all about me.
I've been waiting for this too because I get to ask the questions.
I know, and I didn't even look at them, so you could slip some hard ones in there.
Oh, I'm going to. Maybe. I don't know. But we always start off with reading the bio. I couldn't help but notice you have a very lengthy bio with a lot of really fun details that we'll let our listeners go online and find out for themselves. I'll just give them the short and snappy version. So, Tess Thompson is the USA Today bestselling and award-winning author of contemporary and historical romantic women's fiction with nearly 40 published titles. When asked to describe her books, she could never figure out what to say that would perfectly sum them up until she landed on hometowns and heartstrings. Welcome to the show, Tess.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
We'll see how
we're here. We're ready for our close-up.
We'll see how this goes. We'll see if this one actually makes it.
Or goes completely off the rails.
Well, I'll ask you the question we ask every guest. Tell us about your path to publication. Did you always want to be a novelist?
Well, kind of. So I've always been very creative and fascinated by stories, and especially about people. I'm just interested, there's never been a person I've met that I'm not like, I want to dig deeper in there and find out more about them. So I loved reading from the time I was really little, and always thought what a wonderful thing it would be to be able to write, but I didn't think I would ever be very good at it. And in high school, I got really into theater and acting. And so I ended up I got into this really kind of prestigious program at USC for drama and studied that. That's what my degree's in. And I kind of started leaning toward playwriting. I was directing shows and different things here in Seattle. And I just thought, I'd always wanted to write a novel, but then I thought, the world I know is the theater, so maybe I should try writing a play first. So I had a little sabbatical off of a day job for a couple months, and I wrote a play. And that play was I entered into a local contest, and it won first prize. And what you got with that was a production and everything. So I got to see it kind of from the angle of being workshopped kind of and all this sort of stuff. And long story short, I decided I did not want to be a playwright and that I actually wanted to be a novelist, because the type of stories that I like to tell and read are really more, maybe mainstream is the way to say it, but I like, happy endings and, stories about hope and redemption. And the theater is much darker than that, or it's a musical, which obviously I'm not, talented enough to do that. So I had little kids and everything, and I decided not to go back to my day job after Emerson was born, and she's 15, almost 16. And I told myself that by the time I was 40, I wanted to have written a novel, and I didn't really have any grand plans for it. It was just something I wanted to do for myself. And so I wrote when she was napping, or, I'd get up early and everything. And I worked on a book for a couple years. When it was done, my then husband was like, I think you should shop it around. He thought it was good and everything. So I did, and of course had no luck. Tried to, had nibbles from agents, and how the same story we've heard over and over on this show. But then I found, through a personal connection, a small press, and they took it, and that was River Song. And it was in 2011, 2012, before things really exploded in the indie world. So there was less competition, and that book did really well. It was like 15 weeks, #1 on Nook, and, then it got some traction on Amazon and everything. So it made enough money that I was like, oh, I could actually do this. And I kind of had the bug by then. And so I just started focusing on it, taking myself a little bit more seriously, like, okay, people actually like this book, there's something here. And so I would write when the kids were at school. They were still little then. Then I had sort of an upheaval in my personal life. I got divorced and some things happened, but through all that, I just kept writing. And when the publisher I was with went out of business in 2015, or it might have been 2016, somewhere in there, there was about a year where I didn't put out anything new. And I was just sort of like, okay, what am I doing? And decided to just go full indie at that point. And I haven't looked back. And that was, I only had 8 books in 2016 and I've got 40 something now. So I've just been like, okay, I'm doing it now. Like I'm all in it.
Now, I'm curious, when people asked what you did, how long did it take you to say, I'm a writer or I'm a novelist? Because I didn't say that for a very long time.
Yeah, that's a great question. I can remember distinctly when I was working on my first book, people would say, oh, what are you doing? You know, like at a dinner party or something, or, you know, what are you up to? Because, you know, I had a corporate job at one point and everything. I never said, oh, I'm writing a book, because I did not want to be that person. I would always just say, oh, I'm home with the kids, you know, and I'm doing that. But I'm not a person who could just be home with the kids. Like that's just not my personality. I'm very focused and ambitious. And I also am creative. So it's like the perfect storm of a person who has to do something like write a play or write a book or be in a play or something, or I just kind of go a little crazy. But yes, I was embarrassed. And I was actually embarrassed even after my first book came out, because I was like, I thought after it was out, I was like, I don't think it's very good. And I just was cringing because everybody I know was reading it. And, you know, I think it was more of a novelty, the first book, than it is now. Nobody reads them. None of my friends even know when a new book comes out. But, you know, people would talk to me about it at the gym. And I just remember feeling like sweaty and embarrassed all the time. So I don't know when the switch happened. Probably 4 or 5 books in, maybe, I guess. Yeah. And actually, I do remember in 2015, I wrote Blue Midnight, which is the first it's a romantic mystery series. And I remember thinking, when I typed the end, I was like, you know what? I think this is a good book. I'm like, I think I finally maybe figured this out. Like, I think I know how to do it. Just the structure, everything, all the things, you know, the crafty parts.
Sure.
Yeah. And I remember my mom reading it, and she is like the only one in my family who reads everything. But she said, yeah, you really know how to do this now. Or she said something like that. And I was like, that's exactly what I was thinking. Like, I was like, okay, I think I've got it now. And of course, I'm always trying to get better and learn and everything. But that was like a turning point as far as like, okay, I feel proud of this and like I want to share it with people I know.
And then why romance? Now, I tend to think you write more love stories with either intrigue or historical elements, but I could be wrong. Would you call them romance novels?
That's another great question. Well, first of all, I did not know that River Song was a romance when I gave it to the publisher. They told me that. And I was like, oh, I thought it was like this journey about this woman who, like, you know, she has this horrible thing happen and she moves back to her hometown, which I based on the one I grew up in. And yes, there's a romance in it. She meets somebody, but it's also about restarting, and she's pregnant, you know, so it's about kind of this fears about motherhood and kind of this journey about understanding her relationship with her own mother, community, and everything like that. She, you know, starts a business. So I was quite shocked to learn that it was a romance, but, you know, in this business, it's nice to have a little niche that somebody can put the book in when they're trying to sell it. So yeah, have never really felt like I fit in that world completely. I don't do the formula. I would say the journey is more women's fiction and also just very relationship oriented. I'm very interested in people and their relationships with their family members, with, you know, between women, all that kind of thing. So I kind of think of it more as women's fiction. And when I met some authors at Nink a couple of years ago, they described their books as romantic women's fiction. And I was like, oh, I never heard that before, but that's what I'm going to steal that. That's what I am.
Yeah, I would say so. And, you know, we interviewed Elena Johnson recently, and she talked about books that were genre adjacent, I think is the term she used. And I thought that was great.
Yeah, that was a huge aha moment for me when she said that word adjacent, because I was like, oh yeah, that's me.
For our listeners who are not familiar with your books, where should they start?
Oh, I always answer this by asking what subgenre they're more interested in. So my Blue Mountain series they all have a mystery or some kind of suspense. The characters are older. They're, you know, kind of more second chance type of stories. If they like more of a small town community lots of intrigue and interest between friends and relationship building other than just romances. The Cliffside Bay is good and it's contemporary. And then if they have a leaning towards historical romance or historical fiction, my Emerson Pass historicals would be for them. They're a little different too. They don't really fit in any niche. They're not really Westerns, even though they sell in that genre because they're set in 1910, 1920 in Colorado in a mountain town. But they're really about a family and this little town and all of the people that live there. So it just kind of depends on what you like. And the Emerson Pass stories are the most clean and wholesome of all my books. So I think a lot of people who like Christian romance or Christian novels kind of gravitate toward it, which is wonderful.
So what does a writing day look like for you? And do you outline your books?
No, I do not outline. As many of the pantsers that we've interviewed have said on this show, they've tried and given up on it. And that has been my situation. I do always have a structure in mind, like the character is starting, at X and they're going to grow into Z. So I always know that part. And I know kind of how the different characters will help each other grow and change and challenge, whatever their belief is about their incorrect belief is about themselves. So I know all that. And I always start with characters. I have, kind of extensive character sketches and that sort of thing before I start. And once I know all of that and I know the setting and stuff, then I can just sort of sit down and the story usually comes to me.
I was stuck on one phrase you just used. You said their incorrect belief about themselves. And I love that. I've never heard that expressed before. Is that something you intentionally do?
Yes, and I did not make that up. I read it somewhere in a craft book. And I'm a huge craft book junkie. I've got everything that's ever been written. I go back to them all the time. They're on my shelf. If I'm not feeling inspired, sometimes I'll just go and read a chapter and it'll kind of help me. So I don't know where I got that, but I do believe that is true in characters. What makes them interesting is if you can put two people together who have incorrect beliefs about themselves and that other person sees that incorrect belief and helps them remedy it or see that or whatever. And I also think that's true in real life. So we're gravitated, to the people we marry or our best friends or whatever that have either the same brokenness that we do or opposite of what we do so that they can help heal your brokenness and vice versa. So I am very interested in that, like on a spiritual soul level. And a lot of my books are kind of the soulmate trope, I guess you'd call it. And I believe that in real life too. Like I think we find the people we're supposed to find that help us grow and make us into our best selves. The relationships that work, the people that we're supposed to be with. And then there are those that trip us up because of our brokenness are the ones that we're not supposed to be with, or, that really toxic friend. We've all had those, So I'm just fascinated by that idea, both in fiction and in real life.
Now that brings us to another topic, is soulmates. Some people don't believe in that. I do in a kind of more general way. I don't think there's only one person for you, but sometimes you meet someone and it's not even a romantic thing. It's like a friendship where you go, you connect with them instantly, like within a sentence or two of talking. And with my husband, Greg, I was working as a waitress in a restaurant and he came in quite often. His roommate was the bartender. So he was always just Greg at the bar. But there was something about him that I found so intriguing. I just was drawn to him. I always tell our kids now he was the smartest guy at the bar, which is why I had to marry him. And he really was, but there wasn't a lot of competition at that point, but he's still one of the smartest people I know. And it's worked out for a long time. But so, I absolutely think that that's something right there. People feel familiar to you.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And there's just something about them that just attracts you for whatever reason. Yeah. And it's definitely not just romantic. It's, all kinds of different relationships that come around.
So as far as your writing day goes, are you one of those people that writes as soon as you get up, or do you have to do other things first, or what?
Well, it's funny. It's really morphed over the years. I used to have this routine that I just never deviated from. And that was I would get up, get the kids to school, drop them off, go to the gym, come home, not shower or anything. And I would just write until it was time to go get them, at 2:30 or 3. And that was just kind of, my work day or whatever. And if I had business or admin stuff, I would do that even after they were home, if they were having their snack or playing or doing their homework, whatever. So that was kind of nice because there was such a built-in routine and I had less time. So I was like, oh, I've got to get this done. And I always had a word count goal. That's always been my thing with a first draft, whatever the word count goal is, you have to get that and then you can move on to other things. And I still pretty much do that, but I'm a little more unpredictable about when I write during the day. Sometimes Elena was, like you mentioned, one of the things she said too in her interview was that she's very routine driven and that she can't have stuff in her inbox, like business stuff, because it bothers her and she needs to be in that free space. And I totally get that. I do have to be in that free space. And so I make a decision that morning, like, am I going to go in my inbox and deal with all this stuff, or I'm going to wait and get my word count? Like, it's either one or the other. And once I sit down to write, then it's headphones are on, classical music's playing. I'm like in the, my little tunnel zone. And I write in like usually about 45-minute sprints for first drafts. And then I take a little break and then I go again. And I usually write between 3,000 to 5,000 words a day. Last year I was 3,000 words. That's going to be my day because I was starting to do this thing where I would feel bad about myself if I didn't get 5,000 or whatever. But it was interesting because once I said to myself, oh, just do 3, I ended up doing way more than that most days. So, it's like this stuff's such a mind game. And then it also depends on if it's a weekday, then it's, I have to take her to school, I have to pick her up. There's other things that happen. So I have to be pretty flexible still. Maybe if she's only going to be here another 2.5 years, it might change again. It just kind of depends on your lifestyle, I think. But I do try to be disciplined about those words because I have this like neurotic fear that I'm going to sit down one day and there are not going to be any words. It's like everything's going to be a bust and it's all over. And so I don't like to take too much time off because I'm worried about that. I think, if I take 2 weeks, like maybe I won't be able to write again. I know that's crazy, but that's like my thing.
And I also think if you write continuously, you're in the story continuously. It's like reading a book where if you set it down, you're like, now where was I? And you have to go back and kind of re-enter it. So it's easier just to keep going.
Absolutely.
So have you ever started a novel manuscript and then made a deliberate decision not to finish it? Do you have a partial sitting out there?
I do have a partial that has just a couple of chapters that I have been thinking about since I went to Paris 5 years ago. And this story has been ruminating, and I think I finally have it figured out. So that's really the only one. And it's not like I've said it it's not like I'm saying, oh, it will never be written. I just was like, I don't think it's time yet. I have this, like, I don't know, there's just like this sixth sense I have about when I'm supposed to write something. For example, the third Blue Mountain book, Blue Ink, I was writing the year that Cliff and I were engaged and planning our wedding and everything. And it was actually Christmas time. And the girls had gone with their dad for a couple days. And I drove over to his house and I had my laptop in the car. And, we were newly in love. And I was just like, I couldn't wait to see him. I was so Twitter-pated. And I left the laptop in the car and it was stolen.
Oh, no.
And on that laptop was half of a manuscript of Blue Ink, which is the third book in the Blue Mountain series. And this is one of the reasons I didn't get a book out that year, because I lost everything. And I then ended up rewriting the whole thing, and I gave it to a developmental editor. I was still working with somebody at that point, and she ripped it apart, and she was like, this thing's a mess. And sometimes when people say that to me, I'm like, no, I like this or that, or I might just tweak this. But this one, I was like, oh yeah, she's totally right. This is just it's not the story it's supposed to be. So I put that one aside for 2 whole years. And when I rewrote it, I didn't use anything from the very first except for the characters. Yeah, I had the characters in my mind because they had already been introduced in the other books. It's the third brother in the story. But yeah, completely rewrote it. And I love the book. It's actually about soulmates and has a little bit of hint of like past life stuff and how
And
we find the
it's called
same people over again.
it's like blue. It's called Blue Ink.
Yeah, Blue Ink, and it's about a woman who wants to be a mystery writer, and so she's, it's not having much success becoming a mystery writer, and so she takes this job in Idaho to take care of an older lady, and she falls in love with the son. But it's also really about the relationship between her and this woman that she takes care of. It's great. Mrs. Lanigan, she's one of my all-time favorite characters. But anyway, it ended up to be this beautiful, it might be my favorite book. It's up there with all the ones I've written. It's just about fate and meant to be and everything, which is ironic since the book was like that too. Like it wasn't ready to be written yet.
Mm-hmm.
And I was pushing it because I was like, I've got to get something out because I haven't had anything out. And then it got stolen. I was like, okay, this is like a lot of times when I look back on things, I see, oh, that's why this happened.
Mm-hmm.
At the time you're upset, but then later, oh, if that had happened that I wanted, this other thing wouldn't have happened.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I try to look at books. And so I feel that this it's called After Everything is the title. I think it's going to be this year, but it'll be a standalone and it's historical. And I have 2 other historical fiction novels that I think are some of my best work that nobody buys. So it will just be a labor of love if I do write this book.
A passion project,
Yeah.
as they say. Do you think you internalized some of what the editor had said with the original manuscript when you were writing it again?
No, I think because I didn't stick with any of the story, because it was like a serial killer. It was this whole complicated plot that was actually really dark too, and darker than my books usually are. So it just wasn't right. I don't know. But you know what's weird about it? Because I did write a full novel, I sometimes forget that isn't part of one of those stories. And it's like it's a separate thing from the other. It's very weird, but I'll think of like a scene and I think, oh, I already did that. And then I'm like, oh, no, I didn't because I didn't publish that book.
Well, that reminds me when we interviewed Boyd Morrison and he was talking about brainstorming ideas with his co-writer, and the co-writer had done all of them already. He's like, no, we can't do that. That's already been done in a previous book. Do you ever find that or are you ever worried that you might repeat yourself having written 40 books?
Well, I used to until I heard a talk at, I think it was RAM 2018-ish, maybe something like that. Jennifer Barnes, and I think I've talked about her before on this podcast, but she is a PhD who specializes in fandom. She studies the psychology of fandom. And she did a talk about kind of what she has seen in her research about what creates like uber fans. And, there's the person who will wear the Superwoman t-shirt. And then there's the person who will dress up like Superwoman and go to, festivals or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah. And then, there's like this difference or whatever. And she said that oftentimes people's earlier books will be much more successful than their later ones. And she said she thinks it's because we start second guessing ourselves. Either, oh, I did that already, or everybody else has already done that already. It's way too overdone or whatever. And she said, instead, you should think, oh, well, that first book I wrote was successful. What was it about it? And how can I duplicate that again? And also, if you like certain, she calls them ids. So like, I love scenes on a train, for example. That would be an id of something I love in books. Like if I saw that in the back cover, like, oh, this takes place on a train, I'd be like, oh, I'm buying it. I don't care what genre it is, whatever. So she said that if you can think of it that way, it's freeing. And it was for me. And I came back from that actually and wrote The Schoolmistress. And I've told you this before, that was just going to be kind of my passion project. One that I'd been thinking about for a couple of years. And I put everything in there that I love in a book. And even because I love cheesy stuff. I love sentimental stuff. I love, happy endings. And so I just went for it. And that has been one of my most popular books and, launched a whole series and everything. So I stopped worrying about that. And I thought, yeah, if I've done The Ugly Duckling before, I'm going to do it again, because people like those stories. So yeah, that's a long answer to your question.
Oh no, that was great. And it reminded me of something else Elena Johnson said, not in our podcast, but I had read, she had said, people want the familiar, but they want it to be fresh. So that's the
Yes.
two F's, fresh but familiar. And so that's basically what you were saying. Just put a different spin on what people love.
Well, and I read somewhere, and it's probably another in one of my craft books, that there's only 7 stories. I'm sure you've read that
I've
before
heard
too.
that. I've
Yeah.
heard that too. Yeah.
And I told Cliff that when we were, early on in our relationship. I'm like, there's only 7 stories. And he like looked at me like, really? I go, yeah, and I started. And so now he always quotes me back, well, there's only 7 stories.
So now you mentioned craft books more than once. Is there one or two in particular you would recommend for aspiring writers?
Yeah, the one I always talk about is it's called The Art of Baking a Story, I think. And it's like this big, thick book. It's Janet Holloway, I believe. We'll put it in the show notes in case I got her name wrong. But anyway, it's basically in chapters of there's dialogue, there's setting, there's conflict, every sort of element of fiction she covers. And I can quote that book. I've read it so many times. And when I'm writing, like little advice will pop in my head that's from that book. I think that's just a fantastic fundamentals. Everything that you need is in there. And she talks it all through, and then she gives you examples from great works. And then she has workshop things you can do at the end of each chapter. So that's probably my favorite. I also like Donald Moss. I'm sure you've heard of him.
Literary agent, yes.
Literary agent, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I did send him my first book, and he did not like it. But
what was he thinking?
But he wrote me a nice note back, which was really, because I had said, I read your book, and I just wanted to take a shot and send it. And he wrote me an actual email back, like, thank you and blah blah. Anyway, he has several, I think 4 or 5 books out about kind of not necessarily how to write to market, but how to make your fiction really stand out. And one of the stories he tells in the first one is he's having lunch with this woman who's a writer, and she's really struggling because she's written, several novels. She cannot get representation. She can't get anywhere. And he asked her, well, what kind of books do you like to read? And she said, oh, I love romances. And he said, well, are you writing romances? Oh, no. These are such and such and such and such. She's like, well, you need to write what you read and the books that you would pull off the shelf. Those are the ones you should write. And that stuck with me very early on, of especially somebody who studied drama and, all the great literature and everything. I didn't write for a long time because I was like, well, I'm never going to be Hemingway or Fitzgerald or whatever. So I shouldn't even try. Like, I'm never going to be that good. And instead it's, commercial fiction. There's a huge audience for it. Like, there's a reader for, every subgenre that you can think of. And writing the books that you actually like to read probably makes the most sense. It seems obvious, but I think when you're a young writer, you're just always thinking, I have to write something good. I have to write something different. I have to, and instead just think of the things that you yourself would pull off the shelf.
Well, and you can tie yourself up in knots trying to think, I have to stand out. Something that used to get me all the time is they would talk about a distinctive voice. Your characters should have something very distinctive about them, which I'm not saying that's bad advice, but then I would try to make them so distinctive that they were just weirdly bizarre. And that was very distracting to the story. So you can overthink it if you try to internalize way too much advice. Sometimes you just have to tell the story and then finesse the story. So do you have an ideal reader in mind when you write your books? Is there someone on the other end, a reader that you think about as you're crafting your stories?
Well, I do think about my mom a lot, and sometimes too much because I'm like, oh, she's going to think this is dumb, because she isn't as sentimental and schmaltzy as me. So I have to sometimes go, okay, she's just going to have to deal with it. Like, she's going to think to herself, that is completely unrealistic. But so I write sort of for her, but it's morphed over the years. I have this group of ladies in my street team, my early readers, and they're kind of a composite in my brain, and things that they've told me over the years that they love, or, you can learn a lot by what people tell you that they loved about a story. So I
Mhm.
really try to listen to that. And I do think of them now when I'm writing, and it's very freeing actually, because I think, oh, they will like this because I like it. They're just like me.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So definitely in that perspective.
Well, and that falls into find your readers. The supposition is if you've written a good book and it's the type of story that has appeal, you just need to find the people for that specific book.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What parts of writing fiction are the easiest for you, and what do you find the most difficult?
Definitely dialogue, I think, because, I came from acting in the theater and everything. With a play, that's all you have is the dialogue to tell you the story. So I think that was a great training ground. Also, I think because I'm such a people person and I'm so fascinated by, all the different characters in the world, and anywhere I go, I'm like listening to how people talk and what they say and everything and the subtext under it. So dialogue, definitely number one. And I remember when I first started out, I said to a writer friend of mine, I'm like, does my story just have too much dialogue? Like, is that just like cheating? And he's like, no, it reads great. It's like, and Liz Talley was on, the podcast, and she said,
Sure.
people say her stories read fast. And I think that's what dialogue helps with, it just makes it, they're watching a little scene or, whatever. So definitely a strength on that. And I think also just my kind of psychological understanding and curiosity about people. I'm always trying to dig a little deeper, like why would somebody do this? Or if they had this childhood wound, how would it manifest itself as an adult? All that kind of thing. I think I'm good at that because that's something that interests me. I'm not the greatest, I don't think, at description. Like, I love I'm reading something now where it's like all these descriptions of places in Paris. And I've been to some of them. So I was like, oh, that's exactly what it's like. I really admire that. But I'm not that person who does notice every physical thing. I'm always about the person. I can tell you their facial tics. I can tell you how many siblings they had. I can tell you everything about a person, but I won't remember what color a couch is or, what was hanging on the wall. And I really have noticed this about myself because Cliff is such a doer. Like he's always like organizing something or rebuilding something or, hanging. He's always doing something around the house to improve things. And sometimes I don't notice and he has to point them out. I'm like, oh, yes, honey, that's amazing. That shelf looks so good. Because I'm in my head thinking about either my character or something about the kids or something about him. Like I'm thinking about people, not about what's around me.
And you said something about reading a book and noticing how other authors handle things. I do that too. And I'll be like, oh, that was a nice transition. Or like, why can't I describe somebody's facial features that way? Like, you almost want to take like notes, like note to
Yes.
self. This person does this really well. You should really figure out what they did. So
yeah, well, that's actually I'm pretty sure it's in the book that I mentioned, the story, the art of story. She says to start reading like a writer, start noticing those things. And at first I thought to myself, well, that's really going to take the enjoyment out of reading because I just love to get immersed into a story, but it doesn't. Like you can, your little part of your brain can go, oh, that was interesting transition. I'm going to work on that, or whatever.
So at what point do you share a work in progress? Do you write the whole manuscript first or?
I write the whole thing and then of course rewrite it a couple times and then it goes to my editor. And I always tell Emerson, my daughter, I'm like, if I'm suddenly killed or something, I die very suddenly, whatever the work in progress is on my computer, you must never let anyone see it. You have to destroy it because it's so bad.
Yes, it's rough. Now, that's fascinating that you said, if I die, because I've been told I'm a little morbid that way. One year I told Greg, if I die before Christmas, this is where I have the kids' gifts hidden in the basement. And he said, honey, if you die before Christmas, I have much bigger problems than where the gifts are.
Yeah. And he's like, and the kids will not care.
Yeah. But I'm like, well, it'd be bad to have a dead mom. They should get gifts.
You know what? I think that's the curse of a writer, though, because our imaginations are so fine-tuned, especially when we've, been doing it as long as we have, that you're always thinking of, "Oh, what if this happened or this scenario?"
Oh,
And so it
sure.
it bleeds into your own life for sure.
Well, and this was before the global pandemic. This was just everyday life, you know?
Oh, that's hilarious.
I know I finished a series, my young adult series, the Edgewood series, and I was like, "Oh, thank God I got the 4th book done while I was still alive."
Oh, I
But
think that
people
stuff too. That's so funny.
and sometimes people go, "Why would you think you're gonna die?" And I'm like, "No one thinks they're going to."
Right.
But you
That's the
do.
thing. It's gonna be a surprise most likely, and then we're gonna have an unfinished book in our computer that nobody should read.
That nobody should read because it's not indicative of what you actually wanna be known for. It's the
Right,
clunky
and
sentences are still there. Yep.
exactly, all the bad stuff, and when they republished that, The Second Mockingbird, To Kill a Mocking the one that she
Oh,
put in the
yes.
drawer, I
Go
was
set the watchman.
horrified. I was like, "She did not want this out there. Why was it in the drawer, people?" Oh, that made me so upset for her, and yeah.
I had the same thought too. If she had wanted it published, it would have been published. There were, like, how many years between, To Kill a Mockingbird, and that was just a money grab as far as I'm
I
concerned.
agree,
I'm going on
I
record
agree. Me too.
saying I do
I'm
not
right there
approve.
with you. Yep. Yeah, and she had Alzheimer's or something by then, and so she
Yes,
couldn't even defend herself. Oh, we should add that to our list of worries. Tell everybody if we lose our mind kind of rapidly,
yes.
same goes.
Okay. This is gonna be a pretty extensive list. How consumed are you with a story when you're writing it? Do you think about it, dream about it? What's your deal?
Yeah, definitely, for sure, obsessively, and I find that's the only way to do it, at least for me, like, I have to be all the way in, like, thinking about these people, living in the little town with them, and I definitely especially with my series, I start dreaming about the people like they're real,
Mhm.
and that's very strange, but also really fun, so yeah, 100% immersed, and actually, I'm kinda like that about everything. Like, if I get into a television show, especially now that we can binge watch stuff, which I love, because it's like reading a novel if you think
Yes.
about it,
You don't
right?
wanna
'Cause you get
wait, right? Yep.
right, you got 8 chapters of this, saga or whatever, and yeah, like, I'm into Succession right now, I don't know if you've watched it yet,
I
but
have
I am
not.
obsessed with that show. Like, I literally, as I'm falling asleep at night, I'm thinking about the characters and this, like, why did they do this? Or, oh, that was interesting. So even with television and movies, I'm thinking about it as a storyteller and, into it. Like, I love stories. I don't care how they're told. That's why I love country music. It's like a story in 3 minutes.
So, what is Succession where is it streaming?
HBO.
I'll have to check it out.
Actually, you'll like it. It's very dark, but it's all about this family, this dysfunctional family, and all the crazy things they do, and it's fascinating. Yeah, highly recommend that. If you can stand the F word, it's in every sentence.
I think I can do it. So do you ever, like, start to think about something, like, you feel like it's a memory of something you did, and then you realize, "Oh, no, it was, like, one of my characters did it?"
Yes, I do. Especially if the character's a little bit like you. I have a couple
Mhm.
that are very similar to how I am. Yeah, and you're like, "Wait, no, that didn't happen to me. That was the story."
That time I was attacked in the alley. Oh, no, wait, that wasn't me. I was
Yeah, if I start getting that confused, we know it's like the end. The mind is going.
we should just delete those, computer manuscripts right away.
Yes.
When you're feeling uninspired, what do you do to jumpstart your creativity?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I love the different answers we've gotten from people. I have no musical talent, but I love music. Love, love, love music of all, lots of different types, but especially, country and, those that tell story. And so usually I'll put on music and maybe take a walk or just kind of do stuff around the house, like music that really moves me. And that usually gets me in a creative space. Or I look at one of my craft books, that's another good one, or I read something, there's so many wonderful books like by Karen McQuestion, for example. And yeah, and reading other people's great work is also, just gets those creative juices flowing, and I think is a restorative act as well, which we need. You creative people, I think the well is not just endlessly full. You have to fill it with something. And so those are some of mine.
And I think when you're reading, it's either such a great book that you're inspired, or if it's not that great, you're like, I would have done that differently, or I think I could have done it better. Whether I could or not is besides the point. It makes me think about how I would have done it. So
Yeah,
either way,
definitely.
you're covered. Has anyone ever said anything discouraging or negative to you about your work, about your writing? I'm guessing the romance people sometimes are negative about romance novels. Have you ever encountered that?
Nobody's ever said it to my face, but I know that like literary circles, poo-poo romance novels, which is one of my rants. You've heard me rant about it. It's 82% of the market, but yeah, just dismiss us. And these women who are running their own publishing houses, these romance writers are killer. I mean, they are smart businesswomen. They're brilliant at their craft. So it used to bug me, but now I'm just like, yeah, we're all laughing all the way to the bank, people. So go ahead and be snooty if you care to, but we don't really, need to worry about that. But yeah, there's been discouraging things. I have a bad habit of actually always remembering an insult. Like, oh, I carry it with me for like 20 years.
I do too. That holding grudges is, I have to work on that.
I know, me too. I still feel bad about a voice teacher at college who told me if I didn't improve my speech, I was only going to be able to play maids.
Maids as in servants?
Yeah. The servant characters.
Oh, that's horrible.
I know. I still think about that. And then the dance teacher told me I was too fat. I mean, I think of all these things. But yeah, I think people were much crueler when I was trying to do the acting thing than I think that's one thing I like about writing is it's a creative pursuit and storytelling, but you can do it in your own time, in your own comfort. You don't have to look a certain way or, there's none of those trappings with it.
Well, your appearance isn't being scrutinized.
Right.
And, when I'm in a crowd of authors, we go to a conference or whatever, they are not supermodels. I mean, we're by and large, everyone's very average looking. I'm like, I'm like my people.
I know, that's what I think too. I'm like, I'm with my people. Yeah, we're all like, slunched over half the time because we're working and running into stuff because we're thinking about our characters.
Yes, absolutely. So do you ever have any doubts about a book when you're working on it, or maybe once you've finished it? Yes.
Oh,
she's nodding. Yeah. Yes.
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, all the way through. There's a point. Usually my books are about 75 to 85. They just 1,000 words. They always just come out kind of about that length. I don't really plan it, but at about the 30 to 40K mark, I always say to Cliff and Emerson, this book is so bad. Like, I don't think I can salvage it, or like, I feel like I've kind of written something into a corner. Like, I don't know how I'm going to get out of this. Like, it's not working. And I really feel that when I say it to them. They just laugh now because, it happens every time. But then I go back and I work some more and I'm like, oh yeah, this actually works. And I figured this part out so I can fix that, So there's always that process when I'm writing it. When it's done and I send it to my editor or when I send it to my art team, I always think this one is going to be the one where they're like, yep, she's lost it. It's not good. For whatever reason, she's lost her touch, or maybe they're going to finally figure out I actually don't know what I'm doing. I mean, every time I'll think, even after something's published, I'll think, I should have added a scene about such and such, but why didn't I think of that? So it's a constant torment.
I think that's true of all the writers I admire, including you. So I guess that self-doubt is just what makes us strive to be as good as we can be. And there's a story of a senator in Wisconsin who, this was many years ago, but they made it public that he had Alzheimer's in his later years, which is when people weren't talking about it as much. And his wife found out because he used to go into his den to work on a book, and he had written several books. He was a brilliant man. And one day she went in and looked at what he was working on, and it was complete gibberish. And so now that's my fear.
No,
Like,
see,
did
I'm gonna
he
have to put
know?
that on the list. I know we won't know. I don't think we will. I think we're gonna be like, "Oh, this is pretty good." Oh, maybe that's how we'll know. If the doubt
If we
goes
start
away, we know we're screwed.
yeah, as long as we have doubt, we're all right.
Yeah, but I mean, in all seriousness, I do try to get better with every book, but I almost think sometimes, like, oh, I think I'm on the decline. I think I'm getting worse. Like this is bad.
No, that's just what you think. It's
I hope so. I don't know. Uh,
Who's been your biggest supporter as you've built your craft and career?
yeah, that's 100% Cliff, my husband. And I mean, we've only been together six years, I guess, 6.5 years. But from the very beginning, he just thought it was cool, because he's like the opposite. He's a math person. I mean, if we were combined into one person, we'd be a genius, but we're like good at opposite things. And he read one of my books, one of the first times we ever went away together. No, I take that back. He read Blue Midnight after our first couple dates, and I had to go. We went out for a couple times, really hit it off, and I had to go out of town for a week because I was speaking about dialogue at a writers conference. And he read Blue Midnight while I was gone, and he would send me quotes that he liked or like comment about something. And I remember he said something about alliteration of some sentence, that he really liked that. And I was like, oh my God, I love this guy already. I'm like, I'm going to marry this guy.
Did you know he was going to read it?
No, I think he bought it and just
Just
started reading it.
started?
Yeah. And so ever since then, he's been a big believer. And, for a couple years when we first got married, I was rebuilding after my publisher, that whole thing. And so there were some really lean years as far as my business went. And I would say, I don't know, maybe I'm just wasting my time. Like I work all the time and I'm not getting anywhere. I keep putting books out. Like I can remember the first book I ever put out when we were already married. In hindsight, it was only my 9th book because there were 8 before with the publisher. And I had these friends helping me. We were trying to make a big, splash, and it sold 4 copies the first day. And I
Oh,
sat in my
no.
office and I cried. I was just like, and especially because my first books had done pretty well, but everything had changed. There's so many books. KU came along, the whole thing.
Mhm.
Anyway, he had said so many times to me, I would say, well, if such and such, and he would always say, not if, when. And he just always believed it was going to happen. And he would always say too, like, I don't care if you make $1 in profit. If it makes you happy to do it and we're not losing money, like just keep going in there and do it,
Mhm.
So anyway, finally things started kind of getting better and better. And then like last year, things have really been amazing for both of us. And my dream is to make enough that he would be able to retire early. And because what he loves to do is putter around in the garden and, do all his
Mhm.
physical, he loves to run and do all these physical activities. And I really just like to write and work. So it would be the perfect, the perfect marriage. I mean, we already do have a pretty good one, but it would be great. So I work with that in mind too, of like freeing him from the man.
I know another author friend said that when she reached the same level of income that she had made at a corporate job, that's when she knew she felt like she was a success. And I mean, prior to that, she had tons of readers and she was making good money, but it was sort of like, now I can continue knowing that I'm on the right path.
That's funny that you say that because when I first started, I remember thinking to myself, if I can replace my corporate job money, that's when I will have made it. And of course, then you do that and you're like, okay, well, what's the next thing I want?
It's human nature, I think,
It
right?
really is. Yes.
Well, now we are getting to the fun part of the interview where we ask the extra questions. So, are you ready?
I am ready.
You have heard us ask these questions of people like tons of times, so you should have answers. What is one food that will never get past your lips?
Okay, well, it's one food that I've already had. When we were in France, we went to this restaurant that had andouille sausage, is what they called it. Which out
Mhm.
in America, that's kind of just spicy. You put
Sure.
it in different soups or whatever. And we really liked that sausage, so we ordered some. And I took a bite, and it was the nastiest thing I've ever had. I mean, and I hate liver too. It was as bad as liver. It tasted disgusting. And I went into the bathroom to, not because of the food, but and on the wall, I saw this thing that said something about the sausage being made out of pig intestines. And I was like, well, no wonder it tasted like the worst thing I've ever had in my life. But then we found out later it was only the skin of the pig intestine or something. But anyway, it was nasty. And we talk about it all the time about that awful sausage.
Well, and the ironic thing is somebody must enjoy it. It's probably a
Yeah.
delicacy somewhere.
I guess they must love it because it was on the menu. But yeah.
Who would you want to play you in a movie?
Oh, I see. I should have thought about this one because we always stump people on this one. I would say probably Emma Thompson. She'd have to have a bad American accent. But yeah, I love her anyway. And I
I
think
do
she could
too.
get my nuttiness.
What superpower would you pick given the opportunity?
Teleporting for sure.
What's your biggest guilty pleasure?
I don't
That'd
really
be
like to
fun.
think of terms of guilt. Like a couple of people have said that makes it, but I guess wine, although I've had to give it up for the last couple of months because I've been trying to lose weight and I do really miss it.
What is the worst job you've ever had?
Well, this is interesting because I have had a lot of jobs that people might think were kind of like not that fun, like waiting tables. I was a hotel maid one summer, and I liked all those jobs because anything that keeps me busy and then I get to interact with people and stuff I usually like. But I had a job right before Cliff and I got married. We were already engaged, and the book sales weren't, doing very well and everything. And that was when I was pretty sure the company I was with was going under. So I got this job with some people that I had consulted with. I'd done some writing projects for them, and I took a full-time job with them. And my boss essentially was this like 30-year-old, and he was tech savvy. I'd been out of, kind of corporate world for a while, so I was slow anyway. And I knew he thought I was completely worthless and useless. And he would yell at me and ridicule me. And he would stand behind me while I was trying to type something in, and he'd be like, no, not that, move over, let me take it. Blah, blah. He was horrible. And I cried every day afterward, and I had to leave the kids, and it was just really hard. And I didn't last too long on that one.
Oh, understandably. I think what you're doing now is much better.
Yeah.
So,
Oh God. Yeah.
what's your favorite smell?
Either my babies when they were little, their heads, they smelled so good. And the smell of Emerson's head, this is going to sound so weird. People are like, you're really creepy. But my mom said it one time. She's like, Emerson has the most amazing smelling hair. And she does. I don't know if it's just like because she's so sweet and it just comes out of her scalp, but she just smells really good.
If you could instantly become an expert in something, what would it be?
Well, definitely writing books, but that's an obvious one. Actually, this is weird, but I think I'm going to steal. Well, actually, I have two. I'm going to steal from your husband because Greg said speaking French, right? I would love to know how to do that too.
No, actually, he said cooking French cuisine.
Oh, it was cooking. Oh, I was thinking it was speaking French. Okay, well, mine would be speaking French, and it would
Okay.
also be singing. If I could be a good singer, I would love it, but I'm not.
You don't want to demonstrate for us? No?
Just trust me, yeah.
Just a few lines, happy birthday or twinkle, twinkle. No? Okay. What is the most terrifying thing you've ever done?
Probably put out a book. I remember that first time just being terrified. And I had like a little launch party, and friends came and everything. And I thought, oh, I'm doing fine. I'm not too nervous. I've got, the book had just come out. I was like, this is okay. This is also like an overshare, but I got this horrible cold sore, like right before this party where everybody, like all these people were coming and everything. And I was like, well, that's basically my body telling me you're terrified of this entire thing. And why did you do this?
Stress.
Yeah.
That's what you had.
Yeah.
You know what, though? I think that it's so hard to put a book out, especially in the beginning, because you put so much of yourself into it that if people don't like it, it's like a personal rejection. It's like saying you're awful.
Yes.
you know?
Oh, for sure. And you lose that the more books you do. At least that's been
Mhm.
I'm like, okay, well, if this one isn't everybody's cup of tea, I'm okay. But that first one, it's just completely different.
Absolutely. Even the first couple, I think.
Yes, 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 yes.
It does help to look at books that I love and see that there are people that give it like 1 or 2 stars or
Oh,
hate it.
totally.
It's like, okay, so you're never gonna please everyone. So,
Absolutely. Yeah.
okay, well then what's one thing you're really bad at?
Oh God, there's so many things. Well, I'm terrible at math or anything that's detail oriented. And actually, both my daughters have been diagnosed with ADD, and I'm starting to think maybe I have it too, and I just never knew it because I just like if there's too much going on at one time, or like too much information, or like data and stuff like that, it's like my head starts swimming around, and I can't grasp it. So I think any kind of like really, really detailed type of work is not for me.
Okay, and our final question, if you could live your life over again, would you want to?
Okay, definitely not. I've thought about this one a lot, and people have really struggled about how to answer this. And then we always make these rules. Well, like, could you just choose the what parts you wanted and blah, blah. So I would say no. I mean, would I love to go back and relive some of the moments with my kids? For sure. Moments with my
Mhm.
parents? For sure. But in general, no. I mean, there's been some really, really hard times. And of course, they formed who I am and all that. So it's all good. And it's like people have said over and over on the podcast, I'm in a good place now and I just want to stay there. I wish I looked like I used to. That would be awesome. And had the brain that I have now, but that is obviously impossible.
Well, Tess, this has been so much fun. Thank you.
I love Test Day.
We'll make it every podcast will be Test Day. We're going to start to lose listeners left and right.
They'll be like, "Oh my God, she's talking about herself again." And actually, we do know it's time for the podcast to end because Mittens has now gotten up from her perch and is at the door scratching, like, "Okay, it's time to go out."
Okay, well then that's it then. Take care.
All right, thanks, Karen.
Sure. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Behind the Book, brought to you by authors Tess Thompson and Karen McQuestion. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and post a question in the comment section. This has been Behind the Book.